Hello and welcome. I think I've already done a video about some of my planned UFO reads. It's kind of sad. I'm going to have to go back through my own catalog. And yes, I am starting to get better organized and making notes of things. But I do know I wanted to share about my sighting in August 2023, why my views have changed when I'm reading books. It's made it a very different experience. Now, I have the picture here, and it was in the evening. It was just a fluke that I caught it. I happened to be looking out my kitchen window. Then I ran to the back of the house. It was all recorded with my phone. Thankfully, I could see it back there, and that was the little video clip that I have playing. Now, I tried to figure out what it was. It was when the Perseid showers were at their peak. I'd never seen anything like this before for all the decades that I've been watching the sky. And I reached out to Enzo Sorel, who helped me figure out that it was a plane. He had used flight radar, a free application, and you can see where all the planes are across the US and Canada. And he could tell me which plane it was, the direction that it was going. And when you really look at the picture, knowing that, you can see with the curve of the earth, all of that type of thing. That made me stop and think that if I didn't have someone like Enzo, and if not for this flight radar program that people can access for free, how would I have described that object and what would people think? I wasn't saying that it was an alien vessel. It was literally an unidentified flying object. It may have been a meteor, you know, things happen, things fall from the sky. Could have been one of all these satellites that are up there. I mean, eventually some of those suckers are coming back down. But it really got me thinking back in the day, certainly back in 1947, when Kenneth Arnold made his sighting of those different objects, in particular when not long after there were the events in Roswell. I mean, people were describing what they saw, and they weren't making things up, anything like that. So now when I'm reading books about UFOs, it's very different than when I was reading them 2 years prior to capturing this image. Because, like I say, I wasn't thinking aliens or anything like that. I was, what is this? And in the past, I wouldn't have been able to just grab a picture or grab a short video, which was helpful in terms of seeing the speed that it was moving. There were trees and buildings, so you could get a reference of size, all of that. And it always makes me wonder when I'm reading books about how are people coming up with how big is this and how fast is it moving? Because seeing something in the sky is very different than seeing it on the ground where you have, trees or buildings or some other point of reference. But if it's just way up in the sky and there's no trees or anything else to help you gauge and figure things out, it's much more difficult to come up with, oh, yeah, it was this big or it was moving that fast. I mean, speed you could figure out again if you have some type of point of reference of, oh, it got from here to here in this many seconds or whatever. So I wanted to first share that with people, as well as what I'm going to be up to in the next few months, because yes, Da Vinci is still a spiral and I'm on it. The UFOs are becoming a much bigger issue currently, and I'll link one of the videos that I've recently seen, as there are, again, congressional hearings in the United States going on about this issue. I was very fascinated to see that one of the speakers, witnesses, was George Knapp, an author who I just read last year. In 2005, he wrote Hunt for the Skinwalker with Colm Kelleher. They were part of Robert Bigelow's investigation on the ranch in Utah. Then in 2021, again with Colm Kelleher and with James T. Lacatski, he wrote Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. In the interview and the clip that I have down below, he actually calls him Dr. Lacatski. I will definitely be going through both of these even more closely this time around. I mean, I have a lot of sticky tabs, there's annotating. The very first page is from the Department of Defense saying that the views expressed in this publication are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Department of Defense or the U.S. government. The public release clearance of this publication by the Department of Defense does not imply Department of Defense endorsement or factual accuracy of the material. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never come across any of the materials I've read before that had something from the Department of Defense right on the front of it. I need to try and track down some more of those videos about the hearing. I haven't heard the names of the other two witnesses. I'm not familiar with them from any of the readings, but I am familiar with George Knapp, who's a journalist in Las Vegas. He's also on Coast to Coast Radio, connections, as I said, with Robert Bigelow and his organizations, George Newry, Art Bell, and I was already starting to delve into how do all these people connect. And ta-da, YouTube had recommended this video about the hearings. I also appreciated that one of the gentlemen speaking, I can't remember what state he was from, but made it very clear. The point of this is to try and come up with some answers. I mean, this has been going on for decades, basically even before Roswell. There's the different programs, then they're not running anymore, the names change. Now we have the issue, and I've heard it before, yes, with freedom of information, there's all these requests going. One person, and it may have been in Skinwalkers or one of my other books that came up, they've put in 9,000 requests for documents. That would be one person's full-time job for years to track all that stuff down. But now, because of things like that, it may have been George Knapp who mentioned in his testimony more and more is being moved away from the military and into private businesses and corporations because they don't have to comply with freedom of information. So basically, what seemed like a great idea, and then some people went overboard with it, and the military's response has been, instead of continuing to deal with this issue, they've now just put it out to other businesses who don't have to comply with those requests or release their records. So now it's become an even more challenging issue to try and get to the truth. There was another individual through the hearing who commented about all these other projects that are not reported to Congress. There's a special name, I can't think of it now, but I was a bit shocked to hear the reference to it. And again, there's all this money, and it's big sums of money being spent, and the government has no idea what it's being spent on, and they don't even have the approval or the clearance to be told what this stuff is. I mean, I get there's a reason for some secrecy, and some people have big mouths. Yeah, I'm not going to get into that and some of the other social media, but the point is, there's a reason why some things are kept quiet. Unfortunately, what I'm learning delving into all this stuff is far too often the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, and the left and right hand aren't even sure where in crikey they are. It's interesting how certain behaviors are condoned and acceptable when it works in your favor, but deemed inappropriate, devious, and clandestine when it's someone else doing exactly what you are. And that's just a whole other topic. Obviously, with George Knapp being part of that investigation, definitely going to be looking more into these two books, which I had read and talked about last year. Another soon to review, they're already here. This is by Sarah Scoles. She is a science journalist. Now, what I found a bit odd is that her book was published in 2020. So the year before Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. But there was something that didn't make sense about her description of the funding and Bigelow and his involvement. The one thing I did definitely appreciate in Skinwalkers is the key to abbreviations, and it also comes up in some of the other books because there are so many different departments involved, whether it's within the military and all the rest of it. So I really need to go through this again. Her focus is more on why are people so interested in UFOs. She went to a variety of different events. This is where I learned about Chris Lacatski, an astronomer in Manitoba who actually does the UFO survey every year in Canada. And I do need to at some point shoot off an email and see if I can get him on a live stream. He'd be amazing to have a chat with. I believe it's also in this book that she talks about think it's called the Black Vault, and it's a massive website of all these documents that have come out from the military. But of course, just because documents are released doesn't mean you're going to find everything out, because a lot of the information is redacted. I mean, some of the pages are literally just a few words. It's also why it makes me wonder why people are having this big hoo-ha right now about getting a certain set of files, because there's going to be things redacted on it, and the names you're looking for are probably not going to appear whenever a few people finally pull the plug out of their keister and do their jobs. But be that as it may, another book I need to carefully go over is UFOs, Myths, Conspiracies, and Realities. This is by John B. Alexander, and yes, I did take the dust cover off. He talks quite a bit about how government funding works, and it really helps explain the process, because it isn't the same as, say, I want to go get a mortgage for a house, and I go to the bank and I talk to one person and they decide yay or nay. But when it comes to the government, it's a very different matter of who you talk to, the channels you have to go through, the permissions that you have to get. That's another reason I want to go through this book again. Last year, I also talked about Roswell by Rupert Matthews. There are amazing photographs, newspaper articles. What I really appreciated is that at the back, he has appendix. So we have Appendix A, which is all the people who were involved. He's got the timeline, and that's really helpful because there's a lot of information. Of course, the big thing with Roswell is that the book about the events didn't come out until 40 years later. Now, I don't know about you, but trying to remember something even significant 40 years later is asking a lot, unless you happen to journal and still have your notes from that period. So it makes sense that people may have forgotten the exact time or the dates or the order and sequence of events, making it, of course, that much more difficult to try and piece things together. But what I really appreciate that timeline is I can compare it with the other books that I'm hoping to have read before December this year. I'll talk about them probably in 2 or 3 books together in the coming months. Currently, I'm reading the UFO Files. This is by Palmiro, Campagna, The Canadian Connection Exposed. It's talking so far about the Canadian government, their interactions with the United States government. There are a number of new names that I hadn't heard before, partly because they're Canadian. I'm only a little way into the book. Thankfully, like Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, there's also a list of abbreviations, because of course in this case we've got different Canadian departments that are involved. What I found quite funny reading a little bit of this yesterday is that he mentions Above Top Secret by Timothy Good. I've been wanting to read this book since last year, and now I definitely need to get into it because Timothy Good and this Chunky Monkey work is also mentioned in the other works that I had read. So I have more than enough to keep me busy over the next few months delving into this and scoping out some more of those YouTube videos about the hearings and latest findings. But what I also want to get to, and I have a sticky note on the front of this one, flying saucers, serious business, overwhelming new evidence that they are real. The book that smashes through the barrier of official silence with the exclusive story. Now, this is by Frank Edwards, an author that I don't know, but my sticky note says published 1965, December. Seems not. Because if this was what it claimed to be in 1965, there wouldn't be congressional hearings in 2025 of people still trying to come up with answers. No Earthly Explanation. This is by John Wallace Spencer, author of world-famous Limbo of the Lost. The funny thing is, as I was reading this cover the other day, I realized I have Limbo of the Lost by the same author. I picked both of these up at my local thrift store. This has to do with the Bermuda Triangle. Why have I now moved it up on my to-be-read soon list along with the UFO book? Because there's a lot of information and questions coming up about geomagnetics and whether that has something to do with these sightings and so much more. I'll definitely be reading this. That, of course, means rereading Charles Berlitz's work on the Bermuda Triangle. So again, the reading list is growing. The other book that I do want to make a point of reading soon is Beyond Earth, Man's Contact with UFOs. This is by Ralph and Judy Blum. R. von Daniken's Ancient Astronauts Landing in America Today. This was published in 1974. The cover goes on to say, new astounding evidence from outer space, including the silvery creatures of Pascagoula, Mississippi. Not sure if I said that right. 32 pages of revealing photographs. Now, it's 1974, so of course they're black and white, which makes things a little more difficult, but I am very curious. Limbo of the Lost is from 1969, so a bit closer to the Flying Saucer book. And No Earthly Explanation is from 1974. So 10 years after this book that claimed to have proof, very curious what's coming up in here. Then, of course, the comparison with books from 2005 onward. Yes, I'm going to be a very busy, nerdy girl doing up my draft timelines with all this information, pulling all the names together for all these books, and then see where we go from there. Because, like I say, there are a number of names and things that come up over and over, not just like Knapp, Bigelow, Newery, Art Bell, and that cluster of people. There are a number of other names that keep coming up in terms of the military, different dates, who had the funding, who's telling the truth and who's trying to tell the truth, but there's just so many different things that are questionable. Then you've got people of, oh, it's a conspiracy. The problem is it a conspiracy? Is it the military just trying to be protective? Because, of course, if they're designing certain planes, missiles, etc. They don't want that out in the public any more than they did when they were designing the A-bomb, where people who were working on it didn't even know what the hell they were working on. Makes you wonder, if they did, would they have still continued it? But that's a whole other conversation. In any case, let me know your thoughts. Have you ever seen a UFO, as in something you couldn't identify? Do you wonder about when people are giving these descriptions, if they can't get a photo or a video clip? Could it be something like a plane or a balloon, and it's just, like in my case, something they haven't seen before? And then, of course, when you're trying to figure it out based on their description, you have to try and guess. Have you read any of the books that I've mentioned? Are you interested in any of the books that I've mentioned? Are you watching the congressional hearing? And do you think that maybe this time something may be forthcoming? Because they've certainly had hearings over the decades and nothing's ever changed. Some of it continues to be the same stuff with the same names that come up, like Lazar and Alessandro. So, fingers crossed, maybe at some point we'll finally get some answers one way or the other. As always, thank you so much for the gift of your time. Be safe, be well, and big hugs.